If you've ever wondered what truly lives inside a man's chest, not the words he says, not the promises he makes, but the raw, instinctive truth that surfaces only when death is 1 second away, then stay with me until the very end of this story. What happened on that frozen river didn't just destroy a criminal empire. It revealed something far more brutal: who a man really is when no one is supposed to survive to tell the truth. Drop a like on this video and comment your city below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The temperature had been dropping for 4 days straight. By the morning of January's 3rd Saturday, the Callahan River had gone silent the way rivers only go silent when something is wrong. No current sound, no low gurgle under the banks, just a hard white stillness that stretched nearly a quarter-mile from the tree line on the eastern shore to the collapsed fishing pier on the west. The locals called it a hard freeze. They knew what it meant. They stayed off it. Vincent Moretti did not stay off it. He had made the decision 2 nights earlier over a dinner he'd barely touched, while Vanessa Hale sat across from him in the private back room of Cataldo's and told him she wanted to see the ice. Just like that. She'd read something online about frozen river walks upstate, people lighting fires on the surface, dragging sleds out to the middle, and she'd leaned across the table with that particular smile she had, the one that landed somewhere between seductive and childlike, and always made him feel like he was being tested, and said, "I want to do that. Take me somewhere cold." He'd said yes before she finished the sentence. That was how it worked between them. Always had been. Naomi had found out about the trip the way she found out about most things involving Vanessa, through the silence that filled the house when Vincent came home late and showered before he even said hello. She didn't ask where he'd been. She had stopped asking approximately 3 years ago, around the time she'd found the second phone, and had chosen, for reasons she still couldn't fully articulate, not to throw it against the wall. She had put it back exactly where she found it. She had gone into the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea and sat at the counter for a long time in the dark. That was Naomi Brooks. That was who she had become. But when Vincent told her he wanted to drive upstate Saturday, made it sound almost like an obligation, some business associate with a lake house, some contact worth maintaining, she had nodded and asked what time they were leaving. She said it the way she said most things to him now, evenly, without inflection, giving nothing away. He had blinked. He'd clearly expected resistance, or at least a question. "We," he said. "You said upstate, I assumed." She didn't look at him. She was folding a dish towel. Unless I'm wrong, he hadn't corrected her. That was his first mistake. The drive north took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Vincent drove. Naomi sat in the passenger seat of the black Escalade with her hands folded in her lap and watched the highway shrink into 2-lane county roads, and then into something narrower still. Frost-cracked asphalt cutting through bare-limbed trees, the sky pressing down gray and low and absolute. In the back seat, Vanessa was quiet for the first 90 minutes, which was unusual. Then she started playing music through her phone without earphones, some low electronic thing with too much bass, and didn't acknowledge that anyone might object. Vincent adjusted the rearview mirror once, said nothing. Naomi watched the trees. There were 17 other people at the river when the Escalade pulled onto the gravel lot above the bank. Mostly locals. A few families with kids in bright jackets, a group of men in hunting gear who'd brought a cooler and lawn chairs out onto the ice 50 yards from shore, a pair of young women taking photographs of each other near the frozen reeds. The river was wide here, nearly 200 feet bank to bank, and the ice looked thick and unbroken, and almost blue in the flat winter light. Vanessa got out of the car first. She was wearing a cream-colored coat that had no business being anywhere near a frozen riverbank. Cashmere, knee-length, a wide belt that cinched at the waist. Heeled boots. She stood at the edge of the lot and looked at the river like she was appraising a piece of jewelry, and then turned to Vincent with both hands raised in some kind of theatrical delight. "It's perfect," she said. "Come on." Vincent pulled on his coat and glanced at Naomi, who was already closing the passenger door. She had a dark wool coat, flat boots, a scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Practical. She'd known what kind of day this was going to be long before he'd admitted it to himself. "You don't have to come down," he said quietly, so Vanessa wouldn't hear. Naomi looked at him, just looked at him. "I drove 2.5 hours," she said. "I'm going to see the river." She walked past him toward the bank. The footpath down to the ice was steep and compacted with old snow, and there was a rope strung between two posts that served as a handrail, more suggestion than structure. Naomi went down first, careful, one hand on the rope. Vincent followed. Vanessa waited until he was almost at the bottom and then descended quickly, grabbing his arm at the last moment like she'd almost slipped. A small gesture that she turned toward him so only he would see her smile. The ice felt solid underfoot. That was the thing about bad ice. It so often felt solid. The fishermen 50 yards out had clearly been there for hours. The families near the shore were laughing. One of the kids had a hockey stick. Everything looked fine. For a while it was. They walked out maybe 30 feet from the shore. Naomi drifted slightly to the left, stopping to look at a place where the ice had heaved into a low ridge, pressure from the bank pushing it upward in long, pale fractures. Vincent and Vanessa stood closer to the center, and even from where Naomi was standing, she could hear Vanessa's voice carrying in the cold air. Not the words, just the rhythm of it, bright and performative and aimed entirely at Vincent. He had his hand at the small of her back, not hiding it, not hiding anything. Naomi turned away. She looked at the far bank, at the way the bare trees made a hard black line against the gray sky, at the way the ice stretched on, featureless and enormous, and at the absolute quiet of it. There was something almost peaceful about standing in the middle of a frozen river. She thought about that. She thought about how long she had been standing in the middle of things, not moving, not sinking, not getting anywhere. She didn't hear the sound at first. Neither did anyone else. It was the kind of sound that doesn't register immediately as danger. A low crack, not sharp, not loud, more like a deep structural groan that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from somewhere below the surface, from the bones of the river itself shifting. One of the children near the bank stopped and looked at the ice beneath his feet. The men in the lawn chairs stopped talking. Then someone on the shore shouted something. Naomi didn't catch it. She felt the ice move. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing she would think about later. It didn't shatter the way ice shatters in films. It gave way. The surface under Vanessa's left foot dropped 2 inches, and then the water came up through the crack, dark and fast, impossibly dark, nothing like the color of the river from above. And Vanessa screamed before she even fully understood what was happening. A high, reflexive sound that cut across everything, and then the ice gave completely, and she went in. Vincent was already moving. Naomi saw it happen the way you see things happen when time does that particular thing. When it separates itself into individual frames, each one perfectly clear and terrible and permanent. Vincent had been standing 4 feet from Vanessa when the ice broke. He moved without hesitation, without pause, without any visible calculation at all. He dropped to his knees at the edge of the fracture and reached into the water and pulled. The cold hit him immediately. She could see it in his face, in the way his jaw clenched and his whole body flinched, but he kept pulling. Vanessa's hands found his arms, found his coat, and he dragged her out of the water in one long, terrible effort that took everything he had, and they both collapsed backward onto the ice, Vanessa gasping and soaking and alive. And Naomi was standing 12 feet away. The ice beneath her hadn't broken. She was fine. She was standing on solid ice, and she was completely fine, and Vincent was on the ground 8 feet from her, holding Vanessa against his chest with both arms, while Vanessa shook and made sounds that weren't quite words, and he was talking into her hair, something low and urgent that Naomi couldn't hear. He looked up once. Their eyes met. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked back down at Vanessa. Naomi stood there. The people on the shore were moving now, a few of them coming out carefully across the ice. Someone had a phone up recording. Someone else was yelling for blankets, for a car, for heat. The fishermen were on their feet 50 yards out, starting toward the fracture. The child with the hockey stick had been pulled back to the bank by his mother, and was standing with both mittened hands over his mouth. And Naomi stood there while the ice beneath her feet continued to produce its low, warning groan, a sound she could feel through the soles of her boots, through her ankles, up into her shins. And she looked at her husband holding another woman on the surface of a frozen river, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, this is what it actually looks like. Not a suspicion, not a phone discovered in a coat pocket, not the way he'd started coming home later and looking at her less. This specific image. A man who moved without thinking, moved before thought was even possible, and moved towards someone who was not his wife. She didn't cry. She didn't call his name. The ice cracked again beneath her, a sharp report this time, and she felt the surface drop a fraction beneath her left foot, and she understood, without drama, that she needed to move toward the shore. She turned. She took careful, measured steps. The shore was 30 feet away. She counted them. 12, 11, 10. Behind her, she could hear voices rising. Someone had reached Vincent and Vanessa. Someone else was trying to coordinate. There was a car engine starting in the lot above. And she walked, step by careful step, and she did not look back. 8, 7, 6. The ice opened under her right foot at 5. There was no warning. Not a groan, not a fracture she could see. Just a sudden absence of surface, and then the cold. The cold was not a temperature. It was something else entirely, something that took the word cold and made it meaningless by comparison. It was a total system event, her body registering it as something beyond sensation, beyond pain, beyond anything her nervous system had language for. The water closed over her to the shoulder before her arms found the edge of the ice, and she screamed. Not out of fear, she would realize later, but out of sheer physiological shock, her lungs contracting so hard that sound came out whether she chose it or not. Her fingers found the edge. The ice there was thin and kept breaking under her weight. Each time she tried to pull herself up, the surface gave way, and she went back under to the collarbone. Her coat was saturated. Her boots felt like they were made of concrete. The cold had already reached past sensation into something like numbness, which she understood was more dangerous, not less, because it meant her muscles were starting to fail. She heard someone yelling her name, not Vincent's voice. A man she had never seen before, heavy-set, maybe 50, wearing a canvas hunting jacket, was on his stomach on the ice 8 feet away, inching toward her with an arm extended. Behind him, another man had a grip on his boots to act as an anchor. Both of them were red-faced and breathing hard, eyes wide. "Give me your hand!" the man on his stomach was shouting. "Left hand! Reach left! Give it to me!" She reached left. Her arm barely responded. The cold had gotten into her elbow. She got her left hand out of the water and reached, and his fingers closed around her wrist so hard she felt the bones compress, and he pulled. It took 90 seconds to get her out of the water. It felt like much longer. When she finally came over the edge of the ice onto the solid surface, her body simply stopped working on her behalf, and she lay face down in the snow at the man's side, and he was already talking to her, calling her name, telling her to stay awake, stay with me, talk to me. And she heard herself say, in a voice she didn't entirely recognize, "I'm fine. I'm fine," saying it like an argument, saying it like she meant to convince someone. He pulled her up to sitting. He was already unzipping his jacket. "Put this on," he said. "Come on, let's get you up the bank." "My husband," she said. Her teeth were chattering hard enough that the words came out fractured. "Is he... where..." The man looked at her. He had a weathered face, honest eyes, and he had just laid face down on cracking ice to pull a stranger out of a frozen river, and his expression when she said "my husband" was something she filed away in the back of her mind to examine later, when her fingers worked again and the cold wasn't in her skull. He didn't answer right away. "He's over there," the man said carefully. "He got the other woman out." Naomi looked. Vincent was standing 40 feet away. He had Vanessa wrapped in something, someone's coat, a car blanket. And his arms were still around her, and he was looking at Naomi. He was looking directly at her, and he was not moving. People were moving all around him. Phones were going up. Someone was filming. Someone else was shouting directions about getting to cars, about hypothermia, about calling ahead to the nearest hospital. The families on shore were clustered together, the children wide-eyed. The fishermen were still out on the ice. Everybody was moving. Vincent Moretti stood still and looked at his wife, who had just been pulled out of a frozen river by a stranger, and he did not move. Naomi looked back at him. Her wet coat was already starting to stiffen in the air. Her fingers were the color of old wax. The man beside her had his arm around her shoulders and was steering her toward the bank, and she let him because her legs were working on whatever reserve was left. And she let him, and she kept her eyes on her husband as he shrank behind her, standing still in the middle of all that frantic movement, still holding a woman who was not her, and she thought again, with that same flat, clear precision, this is what it looks like. Not a betrayal discovered in private, not a quiet reckoning between two people in a kitchen. This was 23 witnesses. This was phones pointed at a man who ran toward his mistress without hesitation and stood motionless while his wife went under. This was already on the internet before Naomi reached the top of the bank. The man in the hunting jacket, his name, she would later learn, was Ray Decker, 54, retired, from a town called Kellerton, 12 miles east. Helped her up the path and opened the back door of his truck and wrapped her in a wool blanket that smelled like dogs and wood smoke, and she sat there and stopped fighting her teeth and let the shaking happen. And she breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow as she could make it. She could hear the lot filling up with voices. Someone banging on a window, an engine starting. Someone was on the phone with emergency services, reading out coordinates. Ray Decker was leaning through the truck door telling her a warm front was coming in and that she needed dry clothes and hot liquid, and that there was a diner 20 minutes up the highway where his wife was working a Saturday shift, and they would take care of her. "Your friend," he said, and then stopped, choosing the word with visible care. "The man you came with. You want me to—" "No," Naomi said. Ray Decker looked at her for a moment and then straightened up and closed the truck door and walked around to the driver's side. She did not watch Vincent from the rear window. She looked straight ahead through the cracked windshield of Ray Decker's truck, at the frost-rimmed trees and the gray sky and the dirt road that would take her somewhere warm, and she let herself feel the cold receding millimeter by millimeter from her extremities, that slow, painful return of sensation that means the body is fighting back. And she thought about the fact that she had been standing on cracking ice for years and had only now actually gone through. And about the fact that she had gotten herself out. Well, with Ray Decker's help. But she had reached. She had reached left when he told her to, and she had held on. She held on to that. Ray Decker drove in silence for a few minutes and then reached behind the seat without taking his eyes off the road and put a thermos in her lap. "Coffee," he said. "Probably cold by now, but it's something." She unscrewed the cap. Her fingers were starting to respond, tender and clumsy. She drank. The coffee was lukewarm and too sweet and tasted like the best thing she had ever put in her mouth. "Thank you," she said. Ray Decker shrugged one shoulder, keeping his eyes on the road. "Anybody would have done it," he said. She didn't correct him. By the time Ray's truck pulled into the diner parking lot in Kellerton, the video had been watched 40,000 times. Naomi didn't know this yet. She was sitting in a corner booth with her wet coat draped over a chair near a heat vent, her hands wrapped around a mug of actual hot coffee, wearing a sweatshirt that belonged to Ray's wife, Carol, a small, brisk woman with gray-streaked hair who'd taken one look at Naomi and started organizing without asking permission, who had said to her husband what happened in a tone that made clear she expected facts and not drama, and who had listened to his abbreviated account while she produced dry socks and the sweatshirt and a plate of eggs from behind the counter with a fluency that suggested she'd managed emergencies before. Naomi ate. She hadn't realized she was hungry. The eggs were over easy and there was too much salt on the toast, and she ate every bite and drank 2 cups of coffee and began slowly to feel like she was inside her body again, rather than watching it from somewhere above. Carol sat across from her when the rush allowed it. She was not the type to fill silence with noise. She waited. "I'm going to need a ride," Naomi said. "To the train station." Carol didn't ask about the car, didn't ask about the man who'd been driving it. "Kellerton doesn't have one," she said. "Orfield does. 22 miles. Can I get a cab or a ride share? I'll drive you." "You don't have to—" "I know I don't." Carol topped off her coffee. "You going to call anyone?" Naomi looked at her phone. She had 6 messages. 3 were from Vincent. She looked at the screen for 5 seconds and put the phone face down on the table. "Not right now," she said. Carol studied her with the kind of directness that comes from decades of watching people sit in diners and try to hold themselves together. She didn't offer advice. She didn't ask questions Naomi hadn't invited. She just sat there, present, and after a moment she said, "The pie here's good. Apple or peach?" Naomi almost laughed. She managed most of it. "Apple," she said. The pie was good. She ate it and she did not cry, and she did not look at her phone again for 90 minutes, and by then she had made 3 decisions, possibly 4. The first, she was not going back to that house tonight. The second, there were things in that house. In the filing room, in the basement, on the laptop that Vincent kept backed up on a server he thought only he knew the password to, that she had been choosing not to look at for 3 years. She was done choosing that. The third, whatever came next, she was going to approach it the way Ray Decker had approached that cracking ice. Face down, arm extended, moving toward the problem, not away. The fourth, which wasn't quite a decision yet, more a door opening on a room she hadn't been ready to enter. She was going to need help. Real help. Not the kind that came from loyalty or love, which she no longer trusted. The kind that came from aligned interests. And she knew, sitting in Carol Decker's diner with pie and lukewarm apple coffee, that she had been in proximity to enough aligned interests over the past 14 years to find exactly the right people, if she decided to look. She was deciding. Her phone lit up with a call. Not Vincent this time. A number she didn't immediately recognize. Area code 914, local exchange. She stared at it for a moment, then answered. "Mrs. Moretti." A man's voice. Even, professional, completely without warmth. "My name is Agent Daniel Cross. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Organized Crime Division. I imagine you've had an interesting morning." The diner was warm. Outside the window, the sky had gone from gray to white, and the first few flakes of new snow were coming down slow and soft, the kind that made everything look peaceful. "You could say that," Naomi said. "I've been trying to reach you for about 11 months, Cross said. "I believe we may finally have something worth discussing." Naomi curled both hands around her coffee mug. The warmth coming through the ceramic was still, even now, extraordinary. "Tell me what you want," she said. Cross took a breath. She could hear papers moving on his end, or maybe a keyboard. Background sounds of an office, people at desks, the low hum of federal machinery that had been pointed at her husband for what she now understood was a very long time. "That's going to be a long conversation," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she meant it in more ways than one. Outside, the snow was picking up. The road to Orfield was already dusting white along the shoulders. Carol Decker was behind the counter, watching her with the even, unsentimental attention of a woman who has seen people at their lowest and does not require them to perform recovery for her benefit. 22 miles away, Agent Daniel Cross was pulling a file he'd updated that morning, a file that had her name on it in black type, that contained things she hadn't known he knew, that was thicker than she would have expected, and settling in for the kind of conversation that doesn't end when the call does. And 400 miles south, in a city that did not yet know what was coming for it, Vincent Moretti was sitting in a hospital waiting room with wet clothes and Vanessa Hale's hand in his, watching a television mounted to the wall where a local news crawler was already running the headline, already attaching his name and his face to a story that had 17 eyewitnesses and counting. He did not know that his wife had answered the phone. He would find out. The call lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. Naomi sat in that corner booth at Carol Decker's diner while the snow outside went from dusting to deliberate. And she talked to Daniel Cross the way she hadn't talked to anyone in years, directly, without managing her words, without calculating what each sentence would cost her. He was careful on his end, professional, occasionally pausing to type something she couldn't see. He didn't push. He let her find the pace. She appreciated that about him, and she also understood, with a part of her brain that 14 years of living inside Vincent Moretti's world had sharpened to a fine and ugly edge, that his restraint was a technique as much as a courtesy. She told him she knew that. There was a brief silence on his end, and then he said, "Fair enough." And something in his voice shifted slightly, not warmer exactly, but more honest, less performance. She decided that was enough to continue. She did not give him everything. She gave him enough to establish that she was serious and that what she had access to was real. She told him about the server in the basement office, the one connected to an external hard drive that Vincent had bolted to the underside of a false shelf behind a row of architecture books that nobody in that house had ever read. She told him about the account in the Cayman Trust that was registered to a holding company whose listed director was a man who had been dead for 6 years. She told him about the envelope taped to the back of the master bedroom closet that she had found 8 months ago and photographed and returned, untouched, to exactly where it had been. She told him she had copies of the photographs. Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Moretti," Cross said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "How long have you been preparing for this conversation?" She looked out the diner window at the snow. "I haven't been preparing," she said. "I've been waiting to decide." "And you've decided?" "I decided about 40 minutes ago." He didn't ask what had changed her mind. He already knew what had happened on the river. He'd probably been watching the video on his phone while he dialed. "We can protect you," he said. "That's the first thing I want you to understand. Whatever happens next, I'll reach out to you Monday," she said, "with an attorney present. I'm not doing anything else today." "Of course." "And Cross." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Whatever you think you know about my husband, assume there's more. He's been doing this for 22 years and he's still standing. There's more." She ended the call. Carol drove her to Orfield without conversation, which was exactly what Naomi needed. The snow made the road quiet, the heater in Carol's car worked perfectly, and the seats were worn cloth and the radio was off, and Naomi sat with her hands in the lap of the borrowed sweatshirt and watched the white countryside move past the window and let her mind go still. Not blank. Still. There was a difference. Blank was what happened when you couldn't process. Still was what happened when you were processing faster than your face was showing. She bought a train ticket with cash from her wallet. She always kept cash, another thing the last 14 years had taught her. And she sat in the second-to-last car and watched Orfield's platform disappear behind her, and she did not think about the river. She would think about the river later. She would think about it for a long time, probably, but not now. Now she was thinking about a filing cabinet in a basement office and the specific order in which things needed to happen. The train arrived at Penn Station at 6:47 in the evening. She didn't go home. She went to her sister's apartment in Morningside Heights. Ellen, who was 3 years older and had disapproved of Vincent from the first dinner and had never pretended otherwise, who opened her door and looked at Naomi standing in the hallway in a stranger's sweatshirt with her hair still slightly stiff from river water, and who said, without preamble, "Come inside, I'll make soup." That was Ellen. She didn't ask what happened. She made soup. She gave Naomi dry clothes and a toothbrush still in the packaging and a bed in the spare room with 3 blankets because she knew Naomi ran cold. And at some point after 10 o'clock, when they were sitting at Ellen's kitchen table with the soup and bread and the kind of quiet that only exists between two people who have known each other long enough to stop performing, Ellen said, "Are you safe?" "Yes," Naomi said. "Right now, tonight." "Are you safe?" "Tonight, yes." Ellen nodded. She tore a piece of bread. "Good," she said. "We'll do the rest in the morning." Naomi slept 6 hours. Solid, dreamless, the sleep of a body that has been through something and is handling its repairs in the dark. She woke at 4:15 and lay in the spare bed looking at the ceiling for a while, listening to the city outside the window. New York, at 4 in the morning, has a sound like no other city. Not silent, never silent, but reduced. The constant roar softened to something that hums at a frequency that means still here, still here, still here. She thought about what was already in motion. The video had been posted by the time she and Ray Decker had cleared the river parking lot. She knew this without having to look because she understood how things spread. She had watched her husband's reputation move through the city like a current for over a decade, had watched the way information traveled in the spaces between legitimate news and street talk, and the very specific ecosystem of men who owed other men things. A video of Vincent Moretti pulling his mistress out of a frozen river while his wife stood unaided on the cracking ice nearby. That was not a story that would need any help moving. By morning, she checked. It had been viewed over 2 million times. The comments were not her concern. What concerned her was a different layer of viewer. The men in Vincent's organization who had their own calculus of loyalty and weakness, who measured every decision their boss made against the question of what it cost and what it revealed. They had watched a man act on instinct. Instinct was information. Instinct told you things that a man's words and deliberate choices could conceal for years. She was not the only one reading those results. Vincent called 14 times between Saturday night and Sunday morning. She watched each call come in and go to voicemail and let it. On Sunday at noon, she sent him a text that said, "I'm safe. I'll be in touch Monday through my attorney. Don't come to the house." She sent it from the kitchen table at Ellen's while Ellen pretended to read the newspaper. His response came back in 4 minutes. "Naomi, we need to talk, please." She put the phone face down and picked up the newspaper section Ellen had finished with. Vincent had other problems by Sunday noon. Marco Tessari had been his captain on the West Side for 11 years. He was 51, medium height, the kind of man who made himself easy to overlook in a room until something needed to be decided, at which point everyone looked at him without quite knowing why. He had been with Vincent since before the current structure existed, had been present at decisions that were never documented, had delivered messages and managed territory and maintained a particular balance of fear and reliability that the organization had come to depend on without ever quite valuing the way it should have. He called a meeting on Sunday. Not Vincent's meeting, his own. 4 men, a restaurant in Ridgewood that they had used for private conversations before, back booth. No phones on the table. Sal Ferrara, who handled the port arrangements. Danny Chow, who ran the financial processing through 3 legitimate businesses in Queens. Louis Kwan, who managed relationships with 2 city councilmen and a deputy commissioner whose name was never spoken in writing. And Marco himself, who sat at the head of the table and ordered coffee and looked at the 3 men in front of him with the expression of a man doing long division in his head. "You all saw it," Marco said. "Nobody pretended he meant something else. The question isn't what it looks like," he continued. "The question is what it means." Sal Ferrara had both hands flat on the table. He was the oldest of the 4 by 6 years, and he had a way of going very still when he was deciding something. "It means his wife went in the water and he pulled the girlfriend out." "I know what happened." "So what's the question?" Marco picked up his coffee cup and looked at it. "The question," he said, "is whether a man who makes that choice under pressure is someone whose other choices we can still trust." The table went quiet. Danny Chow was looking at the wall. Louis Kwan had his jaw set in the specific way he had when he was running outcomes in sequence. Sal Ferrara was still flat-palmed on the table. "He's been in charge for 12 years, Sal said finally. "I know how long he's been in charge." "That's not nothing." "No," Marco said. "It's not nothing. But you know what else isn't nothing? 14 families on the east side that follow Vincent because they believe the man keeps his head when things go sideways, that he makes the right call." He set the cup down. "That video is 38 seconds long, and in those 38 seconds you can see exactly how his head works when things go sideways. That's what worries me." Sal let out a slow breath through his nose. "So what are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything yet," Marco said. "I'm asking what you think." What they thought. What none of them said out loud, not yet, because it was Sunday and Vincent was still technically in control of everything they had built their lives around, was that something had shifted, that the particular equilibrium they had all been operating in, which depended absolutely on the perception that Vincent Moretti's judgment was sound, had developed a crack. Not a break. A crack. But they had all seen what happened when a crack appeared in something that was supposed to be solid. Vincent knew something was wrong by Sunday evening. He had spent Saturday night in the hospital with Vanessa, not because she was seriously injured, hypothermia caught early enough was treatable, and she was treated, released by 11 p.m. Saturday with a discharge summary and instructions and a prescription she didn't fill, but because he hadn't known what else to do, which was a feeling so foreign to him that he had simply stayed in motion, staying near her, staying focused on her, because the moment he stopped, He would have to think about the ice and Naomi's face and the way the parking lot had been full of phones all pointed at him. He had gotten her to a hotel. Not the hospital, not his house, obviously not hers. A hotel. Suite on the 14th floor. He'd ordered room service she didn't eat and sat in a chair by the window while she slept and looked at the city and understood that something had changed at a structural level. The way you understand a building has shifted, not because you can see the damage, but because a door that used to close perfectly now doesn't sit in its frame right. He called Naomi 8 more times before midnight. Voicemail. 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 By Sunday afternoon, he was making other calls. Marco didn't answer. He left a voicemail, a measured one, businesslike, the voice he used when he needed to signal that nothing unusual was happening. Sal called back within an hour, which was good. Sal calling back meant the channel was still open. But Sal was careful on the call, precise in a way that felt rehearsed. And when Vincent asked him directly if there was anything he needed to know about, Sal said, "Not right now, Vincent. Let things settle." Let things settle was not a phrase Sal Ferrara used. Vincent sat with that. He was in the hotel suite, Vanessa asleep in the next room, city spread out below him, when he understood that letting things settle was probably not an option that was going to be offered to him for very much longer. Vanessa woke up Sunday evening changed, not in any dramatic way. She came out of the bedroom in one of the hotel robes, her dark hair down, without the full performance of makeup and presentation that was normally her baseline. She looked younger, tired in a specific way that had nothing to do with sleep. She stood in the doorway between the bedroom and the suite sitting room and looked at Vincent for a moment without saying anything. "I need to go home," she said. "I know." "Not my apartment." She sat on the edge of the couch. "My mother's place. In Tampa." Vincent looked at her. "For how long?" "I don't know." She picked at a thread on the robe's cuff. "Things are going to get complicated, aren't they?" It wasn't quite a question. He answered it anyway. "Yes." "Because of the video." "Partly." She looked up at him. "And the other part?" He didn't answer immediately. He had known Vanessa Hale for 3 years and 4 months. He had bought her things, taken her places, given her the particular kind of attention that was the only currency she'd ever really wanted. Not money, though she accepted that too, but the focused, consistent, exclusive weight of his regard. He had told her things he hadn't told anyone else, not because she was the most trustworthy person in his life, but because she was the most uncomplicated. She didn't carry the history. She didn't know the architecture. Now she was sitting in a hotel robe at 6 in the evening in a city that had spent the past 30 hours watching a video of him choosing her over his wife, and she was asking him about the other part, and he realized he was looking at her differently than he had in the parking lot or the hospital or even that morning. "You should go to Tampa," he said. Something moved across her face. Not hurt. She was past that particular response with him, he thought. More like confirmation, like a thing she had suspected was being verified. "Is that what you want?" she said. "It's what makes sense." She nodded slowly. She pulled the robe tighter. "Okay," she said. "I'll book a flight." She went back into the bedroom and the door didn't slam. It closed with a careful, deliberate click that was somehow worse. Monday arrived with specific consequences. Naomi met with an attorney at 9 in the morning. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet, but Marcus Webb, a former federal prosecutor who had spent the last decade in private practice and who had been recommended by a colleague of Ellen's with the very specific phrasing, "He's one of the few people in this city who genuinely does not scare." He was 60, lean, with reading glasses he kept taking on and off, and he listened to the relevant portions of her account without interrupting. And when she finished, he looked at his glasses for a moment and said, "You understand that once you open this door, it doesn't close?" "Yes." "And you still want to open it?" "I opened it Saturday," she said. "I'm just asking you to help me with what's on the other side." He put his glasses back on. "Cross is a straight player," he said, meaning Agent Cross, who he apparently knew. "I'll contact him this afternoon and arrange a formal meeting later in the week. In the meantime, I need you to write down everything you remember telling him on Saturday in as much detail as you can, what you said, what he said, what you offered, and what you held back." He looked at her over the glasses. "What did you hold back?" Quite a bit, she said. Good. He almost smiled. Keep doing that until we're in the room together. She spent Monday afternoon at Ellen's apartment at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, writing. It was the most focused she had felt in years, possibly. There was something clarifying about committing things to paper that she had kept in her head for so long. Something that forced precision, that required her to examine the edges of what she knew versus what she assumed versus what she could document. She wrote for 3 hours. She filled 14 pages. At 4 o'clock, her phone rang. Not Vincent, not Cross. A number she recognized and had not expected to hear from, Paula Marin, Vincent's personal assistant, who had worked for him for 9 years and who Naomi had always liked in the circumscribed way she was permitted to like anyone in that world. Not close, but honest, which was rarer. She answered. Paula. Naomi. Paula's voice was lower than usual and fast. I'm calling from outside. He doesn't know I'm calling. Okay. He's been in meetings since 7 this morning. Marco Tassari came in at 7. They were in there for over an hour, and I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough. She stopped. The sound of street traffic. Marco told him that 3 of the East Side families are requesting a sit-down without him present, that they want to talk to the other captains about leadership before any other business moves forward. Naomi's pen was still above the legal pad. Who's calling the sit-down? Marco. And Vincent's response? A pause. He told Marco he had until Friday, that anyone who moves before Friday is moving against him directly. Another pause. Naomi, I've worked for this man for 9 years. I've never heard him. The way he sounded in there, he's scared. And when he's scared, he gets... I know what he gets, Naomi said. You need to stay away from him. I know that too. I mean really away. Not just... Paula. Naomi set the pen down. I know. Thank you for calling. She stayed on the line a moment longer, maybe waiting for something more. Then, okay, she said quietly. Take care of yourself. The call ended. Naomi sat with the legal pad in her lap and looked at the wall of Ellen's kitchen for a moment, and then she picked up the pen and wrote one more thing at the bottom of the 14th page. Not a note for the attorney, not an account of what she knew, just a single line she needed to put somewhere outside her head. He's going to come to the house. She underlined it. Then she turned to page 15 and kept writing. It was 3 days before he did. She had gone back. Of course she had. There were things she needed that were in that house, things that were part of the reason she had gone back, and Marcus Webb had advised her that returning was not legally problematic as long as she documented the visit, which she did, texting Webb's office the time of her arrival and departure from a block away. Ellen had offered to come with her. Naomi had said no. She needed to be able to move quickly through those rooms without someone else's anxiety adding to her own. She was in the basement office when she heard his key in the front door. For 3 seconds, she stood completely still with the file drawer open in front of her, and the copies she'd been making spread on the desk, and she thought about the logistics of the moment, not with fear, or not only with fear, but with the particular calculating attention to sequence that she had spent the last 72 hours developing. She closed the file drawer. She straightened the desk. She picked up the 2 pages she had copied and folded them into her coat pocket and walked upstairs with her pulse at 140 and her face arranged and her breathing even. He was standing in the front hall with his coat still on. He looked bad. She noted it without satisfaction. He hadn't shaved since Saturday, which was unusual for him. Vincent had been precise about grooming his entire adult life, had associated dishevelment with weakness so consistently that she had sometimes thought it was a compulsion rather than a preference. Now he had 3 days of gray-dark stubble, and his eyes had that particular hollow cast that came from not sleeping enough and thinking too much. And he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not guilt. She'd seen guilt. He wore it like a bad suit briefly before taking it off. This was something else. This was a man looking at the person he had decided he could afford to lose, discovering that the cost was different than he'd calculated. You came back, he said. I live here. I wasn't sure you would. She stood at the bottom of the stairs with her hands in her coat pockets. What do you need, Vincent? He flinched. Not visibly enough for anyone but her to have caught it, probably. She had spent 14 years learning that face. I need to talk to you, he said. I have an attorney. I know you have an attorney. I'm not. This isn't about the attorney. He took a breath and then took his coat off, which was either a genuine gesture of wanting to slow down or a calculated one. She couldn't tell anymore. Maybe she never could. I need to know that you're okay. I'm fine. Naomi, I was pulled out of a frozen river by a man I'd never met, she said. I'm fine. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were somewhere between raw and careful, which was its own kind of answer. That's on me, he said. What happened on the river? I know that. Okay. I panicked. I reacted, and I didn't think, and I should have. You reacted exactly the way you react, she said. That's the point. That's what a reaction is. He opened his mouth and then closed it. He was holding his coat in both hands, which gave him something to do with his hands, and she watched him cycle through what she recognized as the process of a man deciding how honest to be, which was always, with Vincent, a matter of calculating what honesty would cost him versus what it might gain. I love you, he said. She looked at him. I know what that sounds like right now, he said. I know, but I'm telling you because it's true, and because I need you to. I need you to stay. While things get sorted out, You need, she said. He stopped. I've been hearing about what you need for 14 years, she said, and I have been. I have stood next to you and managed things and known things I didn't ask to know and looked away from things I shouldn't have looked away from. And I did all of that because I thought we had something that was worth the cost. I thought I understood what the cost was. She paused. Saturday told me I didn't. One moment, he said. One moment is all it takes, she said. You know that. You've built your whole life on knowing that. That landed. She saw it land. And underneath the impact, she saw something else shift in his expression. Something that moved through the grief and the calculation and the self-justification and reached something harder. Something that was not about her at all. He was afraid of what she knew. He had been afraid of it since Saturday. It had been underneath everything. The calls, the text, the show up at the house, the I love you in the front hall. Not all of it was calculation. She didn't think she was wrong about that. Some of it was real. But the real and the calculated were wound together so tightly in this man that she wasn't sure he could separate them. And more to the point, she wasn't sure it mattered. I'm going to go back to my sister's tonight, she said. I'll have Marcus Webb contact you through your attorney about next steps. Don't come here again without letting me know first. Naomi. She was already at the door. Naomi, whatever you think you're going to do. She turned back. Her hand was on the door handle. I'm going to do what should have been done a long time ago, she said, and you know exactly what that means. She left him standing in his front hall holding his coat. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, and she walked to the corner and around it and down the block, and she did not look back. And when she reached the end of the next block, she stopped at a bench and sat down for 60 seconds because her legs needed it, because the adrenaline had to go somewhere. 60 seconds. Then she stood up and called Marcus Webb. Wednesday, he said without preamble. Cross confirmed. We meet at the field office 4 o'clock. You ready? She watched a cab move through the intersection. She watched a woman with a grocery bag negotiate a patch of ice on the sidewalk, careful and deliberate, finding her footing step by step. Yes, she said. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, sitting on that bench in the cold, was that Vincent had followed her out, that he was standing at his own corner, 50 yards back, watching her on the bench, that he had heard enough of her voice, though not her words, to confirm what his stomach had been telling him since Monday morning, and that in his coat pocket was his own phone, already unlocked, already open to a contact whose name was not stored as a name, but as a set of numbers, and whose specialty was the kind of problem that didn't get solved through attorneys. His thumb was hovering over the call button. His thumb pressed the call button. Naomi didn't see it happen. She was already walking, already 3 blocks gone by the time Vincent brought the phone to his ear, already thinking about the Wednesday meeting and Marcus Webb and the 14 pages of notes sitting in her sister's kitchen. She didn't see him standing at the corner with his shoulders up against the cold and his face doing something complicated, something that was half the man she had married and half something she would not have recognized. The call connected on the second ring. "It's me," Vincent said. A voice on the other end. Male, flat, uninflected in the specific way of men who have trained themselves out of vocal expression because vocal expression is information and information is liability. "I know," the voice said. "I need surveillance, one subject, starting tonight." A pause that was not hesitation, more like a man making a notation. "Address?" Vincent gave his sister-in-law's address in Morningside Heights. He gave Naomi's description as though he were filing a report, as though she were a problem in a ledger rather than a woman he'd watched sleep beside him for 14 years. He kept his voice even. He was good at even. "Duration?" the voice said. "Until I tell you to stop." Another notation pause. "Anything else?" Vincent looked at the corner where Naomi had been sitting. The bench was empty. A pigeon was walking the length of it, bobbing, indifferent. "If she meets with anyone official," he said, "I want to know within the hour." The call ended. He stood there for another 30 seconds. The cold was doing something to his sinuses, making them ache, and he became aware that he was still holding his coat rather than wearing it, that he had come out of the house without putting it on. He shrugged into it. He straightened the collar. He walked back toward the house and unlocked the front door and went inside and stood in his front hall for a long moment in the silence that Naomi had left behind her, which felt different from ordinary silence in ways he couldn't name and did not try to. He went to his office. He poured 2 fingers of scotch. He sat. He did not call the number back. He thought about calling it back. He did not. What he did instead was pull out a legal pad, not unlike the one Naomi was filling in Morningside Heights, though he didn't know that, and write down a sequence of names, not for documentation. He would burn the page when he was done. He wrote them because he needed to see the shape of his problem laid out in front of him, needed to understand the architecture of what was happening, the same way he had always needed to see things on paper before he could trust his own reading of them. Marco, Sal, Danny, Louis. Below that, in a separate column, the East Side families. 3 of them. The ones who had requested a sit-down without him present. Below that, Federal. He looked at the word for a while. Then he drew a line between Federal and Naomi and stared at that line until the scotch was gone. The meeting at the Federal field office happened Wednesday at 4, as scheduled. The building was on the east side, unremarkable. The kind of federal architecture that wants to be invisible. Gray stone and security glass. A lobby that smelled like cleaning solution and carpet adhesive. Marcus Webb met her in the lobby at 3:40. He was wearing a suit that was expensive in a quiet way, carrying a briefcase she suspected he had carried for 30 years. He looked at her once, assessing, and then nodded as if she'd passed something. "You remember what we discussed," he said. It wasn't a question. "I remember. You lead with what we prepared. Nothing beyond that unless I signal you. If he pushes, I redirect. If he goes somewhere unexpected, look at me before you respond." "Understood." He handed her a coffee in a paper cup. She hadn't asked for it. She took it anyway. Daniel Cross met them on the 3rd floor in a conference room that had a long table, fluorescent lighting, and the particular temperature of spaces kept cold to keep people alert. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, compact, with a quality of attention about him that reminded her of people she'd known in her father's world before she'd understood what her father's world was. He shook her hand without ceremony and did the same to Webb, and they all sat. There was a second agent, a woman. Lena Park, she said, Organized Crime Financial Crimes Unit, mid-30s, dark hair, a notepad already open in front of her. She nodded at Naomi and said nothing else. Cross opened a folder. "Mrs. Moretti, thank you for coming in." He didn't fill the sentence with warmth he didn't mean. She appreciated that again. "I want to be straightforward with you about where we are. We've been building a case against your husband's organization for 4 years. We have solid material, surveillance, financial records, testimony from 2 cooperating sources. But we have gaps, specific gaps in the domestic financial structure, in the trust arrangement used for the offshore accounts, And in a period between 2019 and 2021, that we believe was when the organization absorbed 3 smaller operations through means we haven't been able to fully document. He looked at her steadily. We believe you can close some of those gaps. I can close all of them, Naomi said. Webb touched her arm. One finger, barely a contact. She ignored it. All of them? Cross said. The trust arrangement was restructured in 2019 using documentation I can produce. I have copies. The 2019 to 2021 period, the 3 absorptions you're referring to. I was present for parts of those negotiations. Not directly, but adjacent. She set her coffee cup on the table. I know where the records are. Physical records. In a location your surveillance hasn't accessed. Park looked up from her notepad. Cross was very still for a moment. Not surprised exactly. More like a man recalibrating the magnitude of something he'd expected to be smaller. You've been collecting this material, he said carefully. Actively. I've been not throwing it away, Naomi said. There's a difference. A pause. Cross glanced at Park and then back to Naomi. Mrs. Moretti, he said, before we go further, I need to ask you directly. Does your husband have any knowledge that you're here today? No. Are you certain? She thought about the bench she'd been sitting on, the street behind her that she had not checked. A small cold thing moved through her chest, but she held her expression even. I'm certain, she said. She was not certain. Marcus Webb drove her back to Ellen's apartment afterward. He was quiet for the first 10 minutes, which meant he was processing and she should wait. Then he said, That went further than I intended. I know. The physical records you mention, I have them. Naomi. He said her name the way her father used to, with a weight that wasn't scolding but was very close to it. You told me you had photographs of documents. I have photographs and I have originals. Some of them. He was quiet again, longer this time. How long have you been doing this? She looked out the window. 3 years. Since the second phone. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Okay, he said. Okay. We're going to need to, This changes the sequence of what I was planning. The exposure you're carrying now is significant, and if Vincent has any indication that you're... What's our timeline? She said. He glanced at her. Cross wants another meeting Friday. He's going to come with a formal cooperation agreement. Good. It's not simple. A cooperation agreement means you're in this now, not adjacent to it, in it. I know what it means. There are safety implications. I know that too. He stopped at a red light and looked at her directly for a moment. You're not afraid, he said. Less an observation than a question. I've been afraid for 3 years, she said. I've just been doing other things at the same time. He looked at her for another second, and then the light changed and he looked back at the road. Friday, he said. Don't go back to the house between now and then. She went back to the house Thursday. Not to stay, not even to take much. Just the laptop. Vincent's laptop, the one she knew the backup access credentials for because she had watched him enter them twice in the early years when he trusted her proximity and hadn't yet learned to position his hands. She had kept those credentials in her head for 2.5 years without writing them down anywhere, a fact that said something about the kind of patience she'd built without quite meaning to. She let herself in through the back door with her key. The house was empty. She moved quickly. Through the kitchen, down the hall, into the office. The laptop was on the desk. She took it, put it in the canvas bag she'd brought, and went back the way she came. It took 4 minutes. She was on the sidewalk, 2 blocks north, when the car pulled up. Not a police car. A black Audi, current model, with a small dent in the rear panel and tinted glass all around. It paced her for half a block before the passenger window went down. And a man she had never seen before said her name. She kept walking. Mrs. Moretti. His voice was flat, not threatening. The absence of threat was itself a kind of threat. She had learned that a long time ago. Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. Tell him to call my attorney, she said without breaking stride. That's not the kind of speaking he means. She kept walking. The Audi kept pace. A woman coming the other way with a stroller gave the car a long look and moved to the far edge of the sidewalk. The street was not empty. Mid-morning, a Thursday, people moving in both directions, a hardware store open across the street, a coffee place with 3 tables on the sidewalk. And Naomi understood that the public setting was both protection and its opposite, because the car staying with her said that whoever was in it had decided public exposure was an acceptable cost. She stopped walking. She turned and looked at the car. The man in the passenger seat was maybe 40, square-jawed, with the particular expressionlessness of someone who had committed fully to being unreadable. The driver she couldn't see well through the glass. "If Vincent wants to talk to me," she said, clearly enough that a man sitting outside the coffee place with his phone looked up, "he can do it through our attorneys. If this car follows me 1 more block, I'm calling the police." She held up her phone so the man could see it. "I have 2 attorneys and an FBI agent in my recent calls. Pick one." The man looked at her. She looked back. The window went up. The Audi accelerated and turned left at the next corner and was gone. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, both hands gripping the canvas bag, and made herself breathe. In through the nose. 3 seconds. Out through the mouth. 4. She did it twice, and then she called Marcus Webb and told him what had happened, and he said a word she hadn't heard him use before, and then said, "Get to your sister's. Don't stop anywhere. I'm calling Cross right now." She got to Ellen's. She sat in the kitchen with the laptop in the bag on the table in front of her, and she did not open it immediately. She sat with her hands around a mug that Ellen had put in front of her with the wordless efficiency that was Ellen's primary language of care, and she thought about the car and what it meant, what it confirmed. He knew she was moving. He didn't know how far. He didn't know about Wednesday's meeting or Friday's plan or the cooperation agreement or the physical documents she had curated over 36 months of careful, invisible work. But he knew enough to put a car on her, and the car meant that the window she had was closing. She opened the laptop. The backup credentials worked. She had 1 hour before Webb called back, and she spent it going through files with the focused efficiency of someone who has already done the preliminary survey and knows exactly what she's looking for. She wasn't copying everything. She didn't need everything. She needed the specific. The financial routing documents from 2019, the correspondence between Vincent and an attorney whose name appeared in 3 of the absorption deals, but whose firm had no public connection to the Moretti organization, and 1 folder labeled with a date, April 14th, 2021, that she had seen once on this machine when she had walked into the office without knocking, and Vincent had closed the laptop faster than was natural. She found everything but the last one. The April folder was gone. Not moved. Gone. Deleted, and not from the trash because she checked. Properly gone, the way files went when someone used deletion software rather than just dragging them out. She sat with that. Then she thought about when it had been deleted. She navigated to the system log. Vincent had never bothered to hide the log because he had never known she could read it, and found the deletion timestamp. Tuesday, 2 days ago, 8:47 in the morning. The day after she had told him in his front hall, "I'm going to do what should have been done a long time ago." He had come back to the house Tuesday morning and deleted that folder specifically, not the financials, not the correspondence. That one folder, which meant that whatever was in it was more critical than the financial routing and more damaging than the corporate correspondence, and that he had known it was there and had been keeping it available for his own reasons until the moment he understood she was a real threat. She stared at the screen. Webb called at 11:53. "Cross wants to move the Friday meeting to tomorrow morning," he said. "Given the car incident, he wants to accelerate the cooperation agreement." "I need to tell you something," she said. She told him about the folder, about the timestamp, about what its specific deletion said about what was inside it, that it was the most dangerous piece of evidence in Vincent's possession and that he had destroyed it before she could reach it. Webb was quiet for a long time. "Can you get it back?" he said. "Not without a forensic recovery tool I don't have access to." "Cross has access." "Then Cross needs to move fast." She pulled the laptop closer. "Webb? He deleted that file specifically. He left everything else, which means he thinks the rest is manageable, that he can weather the financial documentation, that he can explain the correspondence. Whatever was in that folder is something he couldn't explain. Which means it's something that goes beyond the organization," Webb said slowly, "or beyond what he thinks I know about the organization." Another long silence. "I'll call Cross now," Webb said. Tonight if possible. He'll want to move on the house before Vincent has a chance to clear anything else. He won't clear anything else, Naomi said. He doesn't know I accessed the laptop. As far as he knows, the folder deletion was enough. He'll wait. You're sure? I know how he thinks. You've known him for 14 years, Webb said carefully. People change when they're scared. She thought about that. She thought about the Audi, about the man's flat, expressionless face in the passenger window, about the phone number stored as a set of digits. Book the meeting for tonight if you can, she said. The meeting that night did not happen in the federal field office. It happened in the conference room of Marcus Webb's firm, which was smaller and better lit and smelled like paper and old wood. Cross came with Park and one other agent, a man named Brower, who handled digital forensics and who had brought a hard drive case that he set on the table without explanation. Naomi handed over the laptop. She also handed over, for the first time, the folder she had kept at Ellen's apartment. Physical documents in a manila envelope, 41 pages. Some were originals. Some were photographs. All of them were dated, organized, and accompanied by a one-page index she had typed that morning at Ellen's kitchen table. Cross looked at the index. He looked at Park. He looked back at Naomi. You did this yourself, he said. Yes. Over 3 years. Yes. Without counsel. She glanced at Webb. Without formal counsel, she said. I had informal guidance. Webb said nothing. His expression suggested he was choosing not to inquire further about the nature of that informal guidance. Brower had already opened the laptop and plugged in his drive. He was moving through screens fast, with the fluency of someone for whom computer forensics was not a skill, but a language. He paused once, typed something, waited. The room was quiet except for the sound of the keys. Then he said, without looking up, There's a deletion from Tuesday morning, recent enough that the sectors haven't been overwritten. Cross looked at him. Can you pull it? Give me 20 minutes. The 20 minutes were the longest Naomi had spent since the river. She sat at the table with her hands in her lap and her face arranged, and she watched Brower work, and she did not check her phone, and she did not look at the door, and she breathed the way she had been practicing, controlled, deliberate, in through the nose, count of 3, out through the mouth, count of 4. At the 18-minute mark, Brower sat back slightly. Got it, he said. Cross moved around the table to stand behind him. Park followed. Naomi stayed seated, and Webb stayed beside her, and they watched Cross and Park read whatever was on the screen, and the room got very quiet in a particular way. The way rooms got quiet when information changed the shape of things. Cross straightened up. He looked at Park. Some communication passed between them that didn't use words. Then he looked at Naomi, and his expression was different than it had been at any point in any of their interactions, and she understood before he spoke that whatever was on that screen was not what any of them had expected. Mrs. Moretti, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that your answer matters a great deal. Her hands were still in her lap. She kept them there. Ask, she said. How much do you know about your husband's relationship with a man named Gerald Fitch? The name hit her somewhere below the sternum, not because she knew Gerald Fitch, but because she didn't. 14 years of knowing everything that moved through Vincent Moretti's world, 14 years of careful observation and patient accumulation, and the name Gerald Fitch was not in any of it. Nothing, she said. I don't know that name. Cross nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd feared rather than hoped. Gerald Fitch is a deputy U.S. attorney, he said, Office of Organized Crime Prosecutions. He has been, for the past 6 years, the senior attorney overseeing federal organized crime cases in this district. The room was very quiet. The file your husband deleted Tuesday morning, Cross said, contains 3 years of correspondence between Vincent Moretti and Gerald Fitch. It contains payment records. It contains, in Fitch's own words in a message dated 11 months ago, the names of 2 cooperating witnesses in an active federal investigation. He paused. An investigation being run by this office. Naomi heard Marcus Webb inhale. The 2 witnesses named in that correspondence, Cross said, and now his voice had something in it that was not professional distance, something harder and colder and more personal. were relocated 8 months ago for their safety. One of them is still in relocation. The other one, he stopped. Park picked it up quietly. The other one was found dead in Phoenix, Arizona, 4 months ago. We attributed it to a rival organization. We were wrong. The fluorescent lights hummed. Naomi understood, in that moment, the full shape of what she had been living inside without knowing it. Not just an organization, not just corruption and hidden accounts, and the long, ugly machinery of a criminal empire that she had chosen, years ago, not to examine too closely. This, a deputy U.S. attorney on Vincent's payroll. Federal investigations compromised from inside. A witness dead in Phoenix because the man prosecuting the case had sold his name. She thought about Agent Cross spending 4 years building a case. She thought about the gaps he had described, the 2019 to 2021 period, the absorptions, the offshore structure. She thought about how a case develops gaps when someone on the inside is creating them. She thought about the Audi, about Tuesday morning, about Vincent returning to the house to delete one specific file and leaving everything else, because everything else was manageable, and this was not. And he had known what she was capable of and had moved to cut off the most critical piece. He had almost succeeded. The cooperation agreement, Webb said carefully from beside her. Given what's just been recovered, Cross, you understand that Fitch's involvement fundamentally changes. I understand what it changes, Cross said. Fitch is suspended as of tonight. There will be an internal investigation. Everything connected to him gets re-examined. He looked at Naomi. Which means every case he touched. Which means the case against your husband's organization gets restructured from the ground up. How long? Naomi said. The restructure? How long does that take? How long am I? She stopped. Found the word. Exposed. Cross and Park exchanged another look. Webb's hand moved slightly on the table, not quite reaching for his pen. The restructure takes weeks, Cross said. The internal investigation runs parallel. In the meantime, he paused. We need to be honest with you about the risk profile. With Fitch suspended, Vincent is going to know something triggered it. He may not know it came from you specifically, but he'll know tonight. He'll know within hours. Naomi looked at the laptop screen, which she still couldn't read from where she was sitting. He put a car on me this morning, she said. We know. We've had eyes on you since Wednesday. She absorbed that. And you didn't. We were waiting to see how he moved, Cross said. We know now. Do you know about the other number? She said. The one he keeps as digits. No name. Cross looked at her. Tell me about it. She told him. The flat voice. Until I tell you to stop. The way Vincent had stood at the corner of his own block with his coat unzipped in the cold, calling someone whose number wasn't stored as a name because names were evidence. Park was writing. That's a problem for tonight, Cross said. We can move you. You need to move my sister too, Naomi said. Ellen Reyes, Morningside Heights. She gave the address. Her voice was steady. She was concentrating very hard on keeping it steady. We'll have someone there within the hour, Cross said. She nodded. She looked at the table. She had walked into this building tonight thinking she was the one dismantling something, thinking she had built a case over 3 years with patience and precision, built it brick by careful brick in the margins of a marriage she had already grieved, and that she was going to lay it down in front of the right people and watch the structure fall. What she had actually done, she understood now, was pull a thread that unraveled something far larger than Vincent Moretti's organization. Something that touched the machinery meant to stop men like him. Something that had been rotting from inside for 6 years while Gerald Fitch cashed checks and buried witnesses and left gaps in federal cases the size of graves. She had not known about Fitch. Vincent had known she didn't know about Fitch. And still, in the end, she had gotten to it anyway. Not by design, but because she had been thorough and patient, and because a deleted file is not a destroyed file when the sectors haven't been overwritten, and because Brower had 20 minutes in the right hardware, and Brower had 20 minutes in the right hardware, and he had used both. And that was the fact Vincent Moretti had failed to account for. That patience and precision and 36 months of invisible work could survive one deleted file. Cross moved first. He stepped out of the conference room with his phone already at his ear before the door had fully closed behind him, and Naomi could hear his voice through the wall, clipped, operational, the kind of talking that was less communication than activation. Park stayed in the room, writing steadily, and Brower was copying files to his drive with the focused indifference of a man who processed revelations as data rather than events. Webb put his hand flat on the table near Naomi's. Not touching. Near. "You need to breathe," he said quietly. "I am breathing." "You need to breathe differently." She made herself do it. In through the nose, 3 count, out through the mouth, 4 count. Her hands were still in her lap and they were completely steady, which she recognized as shock rather than calm and treated accordingly. She did not trust the steadiness, did not perform it, just let it be there and watched it. Cross came back in 4 minutes. "We have a team moving on the house now," he said. "Digital forensics, physical search under the warrant we've been holding since Tuesday. Fitch's suspension is effective as of 30 minutes ago. That's already moving through channels I can't stop even if I wanted to, which I don't." He sat. He looked at Naomi directly. "Vincent is going to know something broke within the next 2 hours. Maybe less, depending on who he has inside the building." "Does he have someone inside this building?" Webb said. "We're assuming yes until we confirm otherwise. That's standard procedure when a senior DOJ official is compromised." Cross laced his fingers on the table. "Mrs. Moretti, where would he go?" She looked at him. "What?" "When he understands the walls are coming down. When he gets the call that his house is being searched and Fitch is suspended and the cooperation agreement exists, where does Vincent Moretti go?" She thought about it. Not long. The answer was there. It had always been there. She just hadn't needed it before. "He has a property in Westchester," she said. "It's not in his name. It's registered to a company that traces back 4 removes to a name you won't find in any of the documents I gave you. He uses it when he needs to think." "Address?" She gave it. Park wrote it down. "Is he armed?" Cross said. "He's always armed," she said. "He carries a Sig Sauer P226 inside the right hip. He has a second piece in the house, but I don't know where he keeps it currently. He moved it after I found the second phone because he thought I might use it." She said this without particular emphasis. Park looked up from her notepad for a fraction of a second and then looked back down. Cross nodded. He was already typing on his phone with one thumb. "We'll have agents at the Westchester property within 90 minutes, he said. "The priority right now is you and your sister. We're putting both of you in a secure location tonight." "Ellen doesn't know any of this," Naomi said. "I know. She's going to We'll handle it carefully. Agent Park will go personally." He looked at Park, who nodded once, already packing her notepad. "Is there anything else you need to tell me tonight? Anything you haven't told me yet because you were waiting to see how this went?" Naomi thought about it honestly, the way she'd been trying to do everything honestly for the last 72 hours, which was its own kind of exhaustion after years of managing what she let herself know. "There's an account," she said, "in the documents I gave you. Page 31, the Cayman Trust. That account has a secondary signatory, someone you haven't identified in your investigation." "Who?" "Marco Tessari." Cross stopped typing. "Marco is clean on paper," she said. "Vincent spent 7 years making sure of that because Marco is the succession. If Vincent goes down, Marco steps in and the organization continues. The account on page 31 is the bridge between them. It's how Vincent transfers authority financially without any visible handshake." She paused. "Marco called a meeting Sunday. I heard from someone inside. He's already positioning." "Your source inside the organization?" "Is someone I'm not going to identify tonight. Maybe ever." She held Cross's gaze. "I'll give you the account. I'll give you the secondary signatory documentation. The source stays mine." A long beat. Cross and Webb engaged in a brief silent negotiation conducted entirely through peripheral awareness. Then Cross said, "Okay, for now." "Page 31, she said. "The secondary signatory is listed as M. Tesaro with an O, misspelled deliberately, 1 character off. That was Vincent's system. It's in 3 other documents using the same variant." Park, from the doorway. "I'll find it." Then she was gone, and the room was 3 people in a forensic drive and the fluorescent lights and the particular quality of quiet that follows when too much information has been deposited in too short a time and all the available minds are processing it. Webb looked at Naomi. You're exhausted, he said. Yes. Is there anything else tonight? She thought. She turned the question over carefully, the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. No, she said. That's everything. She was wrong about that. The secure location was a federal apartment on the Upper West Side. 2 bedrooms, mid-floor, the kind of building with a doorman and a freight elevator, and neighbors who kept irregular hours and didn't make eye contact. Park brought Ellen there at 11:15. Ellen arrived carrying a tote bag she had packed in 7 minutes, which told Naomi something about Ellen's relationship with contingency planning. She walked in, saw her sister sitting on the couch in the clothes she'd been wearing all day with dark circles under her eyes, and federal agents visible through the open door to the hallway, and she set the tote bag down and said, "How bad?" "Bad enough," Naomi said. Ellen sat beside her on the couch. She didn't reach for her hand. She just sat close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, which was how Ellen had always communicated the things she couldn't say. They stayed like that for a while. At 1:40 in the morning, Cross called. "He's not at the Westchester property," he said. "Agents arrived at 12:50. House was empty. There's evidence of recent occupancy, food out, a coat on a chair, but he was gone." Naomi was standing at the apartment window looking at the street below. The building was 20 stories. The street was a long way down. How recent? 30, 40 minutes before they arrived. He had a head start. A pause. "Naomi, someone tipped him. I don't know yet who, but someone in the notification chain between Fitch's suspension and the warrant execution told him the walls were moving. He ran." She processed this. "What does running mean for the case?" "Running means he's scared and he's making decisions scared, which is when people make mistakes. Running also means he's not in custody, which means the next 24 hours are—" He stopped. "Complicated." "He's going to come for me," she said. "We don't know that." "Yes, we do," she said. "He knows I'm the reason the case moved. He may not know about tonight specifically, but he's been watching me since Saturday, and he knows I was building towards something, and now Fitch is suspended, and agents are in his house, and he ran. He knows." She watched a cab move through the street below. "He's going to come for me because I'm the one thing he thinks he can still control. Because in 22 years of running an organization, whenever something started collapsing, he found the weakest point and applied pressure there." She paused. "He doesn't know I'm not that anymore." Silence on the line. "The building is covered," Cross said. 2 agents in the lobby, 2 on the floor, 1 in the stairwell. "There's no scenario in which he gets to you tonight." "I know," she said. But she stood at the window for another hour after the call ended, watching the street, not because she was afraid, or not only because she was afraid, but because she needed to see the shape of the city she was living in, the one she was going to have to navigate after this was over, when the federal protection folded up and the case moved into its next phase and she was left standing in whatever remained of her life. She fell asleep on the couch at 3 and woke at 6 when her phone rang. Not Cross, not Webb. A number she didn't recognize. She answered it because she had been answering unknown numbers for a week, and something had changed in her relationship to the known. "Naomi," Vincent's voice. Quieter than she had ever heard it. Not gentle, depleted, like a man running on the last of something. "I need you to listen to me." She sat up, ran a hand through her hair. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to a lot of people." A sound, half breath, half something that wasn't quite a laugh. "I know what you did," he said. "The laptop, the files, the meeting Wednesday." A pause. "I know about Cross." She looked at the hallway. The apartment door was closed. She could hear the low presence of agents on the other side of it. "Then you know how this ends," she said. "It doesn't have to end the way you think." "How does it end, Vincent?" "You come talk to me. In person. Just us." His voice had the quality of something held very carefully, like a man carrying something he knows will shatter if he grips too hard. "Give me an hour, before this goes any further. 1 hour." "You know I can't do that." "Naomi." The way he said her name. 14 years in that name. She recognized it and felt nothing clean about it. Not relief that she felt nothing, not satisfaction. just the flat, honest recognition that what had been there once was gone, and that its going had been a slow process spread over years and not a single event, though the river had been the moment she saw it clearly. "I'm asking you, please." "You put a car on me," she said. "You had someone watching my sister's building. You called a number you keep stored as digits, and you told him to watch me. And if I met with anyone official, you wanted to know within the hour. That's what you did." Silence. "You were going to use it," she said. "Whatever that number was going to do with the information, you were going to use it. Against me." "I was scared." "I know you were scared. I was scared too. I was scared for 3 years, and I kept showing up in that house and sitting across from you at dinner and watching you make decisions that I knew were going to end like this." She stood up from the couch, her bare feet on the hardwood, the morning light coming through the window pale and thin. "The difference between us is what we did with scared." The line was quiet for a long time. "I can't go in," he said. "You understand that. I can't just walk in." "I know." "What happens to me if I talk to an attorney?" she said. "Not one connected to the organization, a real one." She paused. "Webb might recommend someone." Another silence. She could hear his breathing, could hear the quality of a space around him. No traffic, no ambient sound, somewhere quiet and enclosed. A car, maybe, or a building with thick walls. "Did you know?" he said finally. "About Fitch?" "No," she said. "I found out the same night Cross did. He was supposed to—" Vincent stopped. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to the witness who died in Phoenix," she said. The line went very quiet. "I didn't know about Phoenix," he said. And she believed him, which was the worst thing about it. She could hear the difference between Vincent lying and Vincent telling the truth, had been able to hear it for a decade, and this was the truth. And the truth was that a man had died because of a system Vincent had built and maintained, even if he hadn't personally ordered that specific consequence. And the distinction barely mattered now. "Vincent," she said, "this is over. You know it is. What you do in the next few hours determines what the next 20 years look like. That's the only choice you still have." A long exhale. "You really did all of it," he said. 3 years?" "Yes." "While you were—" He didn't finish the sentence. "While I was making dinner and sitting across from you and folding dish towels?" she said. "Yes." Silence. Then, "I loved you," he said. "I need you to know that. Whatever you think, I know that," she said. It wasn't enough. She ended the call. She stood in the middle of the federal apartment with her phone in her hand and the morning light coming through the window, and somewhere in the building, the sound of water moving through pipes, and somewhere outside, the sound of the city beginning its day. And she breathed, and she did not cry. And after a moment, she walked to the window and looked out at the street. The call to Cross happened 30 seconds later. She told him everything, the number, the voice quality, the detail about not being in traffic. He had it moving within a minute. Triangulation on the burner phone, which Vincent had made the mistake of keeping on long enough. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee because Ellen was still asleep, and she needed something to do with her hands, and she was standing at the counter, watching it brew, when the knock came at the apartment door. Not the door, the window. Not a knock. A sound. Glass. Stressed. The kind of sound that glass makes before it makes a different, worse sound. She spun, and the window behind her showed the morning and the city and the balcony she hadn't known this apartment had because she hadn't checked. And on the balcony there was a man's shape, dark against the gray morning, and he was not Vincent. He was the man from the Audi. He had a bolt cutter in one hand and the balcony railing behind him, and he had clearly come up the outside of this building in a way that should not have been possible and was apparently nonetheless real. And the door to the hallway was 20 feet away and the agents were on the other side of it, and she had 20 feet and whatever time the window took to fail. She did not freeze. This was the thing she would hold on to later. She did not freeze. She grabbed the coffee carafe from the maker, still filling, half full of boiling liquid, and she threw it at the window as hard as she could from 8 feet away and screamed loud enough that her own throat felt it. One long, sustained note that had no word in it, just volume, just pure animal alarm designed to penetrate a door in a hallway and reach the ears of 2 federal agents. The carafe hit the window. The window spidered but held. The man on the balcony pulled back involuntarily from the impact and the splash of hot liquid through the cracked glass, and that cost him 2 seconds. The door came in on the second, not opened, breached. The two agents from the hallway hit it simultaneously, and it came off the upper hinge, and they were in the room with weapons drawn and voices raised, and the man on the balcony was already moving back, already calculating the exit arithmetic. And one of the agents went for the window while the other moved in front of Naomi, and she let him, stepped back, put the counter at her spine, and breathed. Her heart was beating at a frequency that she felt in her temples and her fingertips and the backs of her knees. Her throat hurt. The window was cracked in a starburst pattern, the spiderweb fracture spreading from the carafe's impact point, and through it she could see the man on the balcony making a decision, and then he made it. He went over the railing, not down but across, some kind of lateral move to the adjacent building's fire escape that should not have worked, but apparently did because he cleared it and was gone. The agent at the window was already on his radio. The other one, the one in front of Naomi, turned to look at her, young, mid-20s, a face that was doing very hard work to stay professional. "Are you hurt?" he said. She looked at her hands. No burns. The carafe had been half empty and she had been far enough back. "No," she said. "You need to sit down." "I know." "Mrs. Moretti," I said, "I know." She walked to the couch and sat down. Her legs were shaking now, the adrenaline converting to tremor now that the immediate need for it was over, and she sat with both hands flat on her thighs and pressed down and made herself breathe. Ellen was in the bedroom doorway. She had woken up. Her face was white and specific. Not generic fear, but the face of someone who has just understood, in concrete terms, something they had previously known only in the abstract. "Naomi," she said. "I'm fine," Naomi said. "You threw a coffee pot at someone." "I did." Ellen stood in the doorway for another moment, and then she walked to the couch and sat beside her sister, close enough that their arms pressed together from shoulder to elbow, and neither of them said anything else for a while. Cross arrived at the apartment at 7:42. He came in fast, took in the cracked window and the sprayed coffee and the door hanging at an angle, and then looked at Naomi on the couch. "The man on the balcony," he said. "I gave the description to your agent," she said. "He matches the description of a man named Kevin Rusk. He's done work for the Moretti organization before. Off book." Cross sat in the chair across from the couch. He looked like a man who had been awake since before midnight and was running on something other than sleep. "We located Vincent 40 minutes ago, Tribeca, a building he has no documented connection to. We found it from the phone triangulation." He paused. "He's agreed to come in." Naomi looked at him. "Not an arrest, not yet. He called an attorney at 6 this morning. Independent, no organization ties. The attorney called us at 6:40. Vincent is willing to come in voluntarily for an interview in exchange for confirmation that the cooperation framework is still available." "Is it?" she said. "That depends on the next few hours." Cross leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Naomi, Kevin Rusk coming up the outside of this building was either Vincent's order or it was someone else's. If it was Vincent's order, the cooperation framework is gone and we arrest him when he walks in. If it was someone acting without his direction, Marco Tassari, for instance, who we now know had his own reasons to want you silenced before the secondary signatory came out, then the picture is more complicated." She thought about the phone call, the depleted quality of Vincent's voice. "I can't go in." And then, 3 hours later, an attorney calling Cross. She thought about Marco at the table in Ridgewood on Sunday, asking his careful questions. Whether a man who makes that choice under pressure is someone whose other choices we can still trust. "It was Marco," she said. "Why do you think that?" "Because Vincent called me at 6 in the morning and spent 10 minutes trying to talk me into meeting him alone. He didn't sound like a man who had just sent someone up the outside of a building to get to me. He sounded like a man who was trying to find a way out." She paused. "Marco knew about the secondary signatory. I don't know how. Maybe he found out about the federal meeting somehow. Maybe he has his own source inside. But Marco knew that if I gave that account to the FBI, he was done. His whole succession plan, the clean record he spent 7 years building, gone. He moved to protect himself, not Vincent." Cross looked at her steadily. "That's a significant conclusion." "Yes." "Can you support it?" "You have the account documentation. Find Marco's movements last night and this morning. Find how Russ got access to this building. Someone had to know which apartment. Someone had to know the layout. Vincent didn't have that information. Marco did. Cross was very still for a moment, then he stood. "Stay in this room," he said. "I mean that literally. Both of you." He looked at Ellen briefly, an acknowledgement rather than an instruction, and then back at Naomi. "This is going to move fast now." "I know," she said. He left. The door, still only half-hinged, was pulled as closed as it would go by the agent in the hallway. Naomi sat on the couch. She thought about the river. She always came back to the river. The way the ice had given without warning. That particular sensation of solid ground removing itself from under you. No transition, no gradual warning, just the cold and the dark, and the water closing over, and your arms finding the edge, and your fingers breaking through each time you tried to pull up, and then Ray Decker's hand closing around her wrist, hard enough to feel the bones. She thought about what Cross had said. He moved to protect himself. She thought about how many people in the last week had moved to protect themselves, including her, and how the difference between them was what they'd chosen to move toward rather than away from. Her phone buzzed. A text from Webb. "Heard about this morning, coming to you, 20 minutes. Then another, 30 seconds later, from a number she didn't immediately recognize, and then did. Paula Marin. Vincent's assistant, who had called from a street corner and kept her voice low. The text said only, "Marco is running." Naomi stared at it. She texted back, "How do you know?" The response came in 40 seconds. "Because he called me this morning and told me to clear the office files. I didn't, and then I watched him leave the building with a bag." "Where?" A pause. Then, "He took the tunnel to Jersey. I saw him call someone from the lobby before he walked out. He was on the phone for maybe 30 seconds, and then he put it away, and he didn't look scared. He looked like a man who had already decided." Naomi's jaw tightened. A man who had already decided. A man who had spent 11 years as Vincent Moretti's most trusted captain and had spent the last 4 days calculating the collapse and positioning himself inside it, and who had sent Kevin Rusk up the outside of a federal building at 6 in the morning, not in panic but in cold, deliberate strategy, to silence the one witness who could prove the succession account existed, and who was now in a car in a tunnel under the Hudson River with 30 seconds of phone conversation suggesting someone was waiting for him on the other side. She called Cross. He picked up on the first ring. She could hear he was already moving, background sound of a larger space, voices, the specific acoustic of a situation room or operations floor. She told him about Paula's text. She told him about the tunnel and the 30-second phone call and the bag and the look on Marco Tessari's face, which Paula had described as a man who had already decided, and which Naomi understood meant a man who believed he still had a viable exit. Cross said 2 words that were not intended for her and then said, "Don't move," and the call ended. She looked at her phone. Then she looked at Ellen, who was sitting beside her, who had been sitting beside her since the agents came in through the door, who had not asked any of the questions she must have had because she understood without being told that some moments required the questions to wait. "How much of that did you follow?" Naomi said. "Enough," Ellen said. "I'm going to need you to not be afraid right now." Ellen looked at her. "I'm terrified," she said, "but I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the city was fully awake now, the sound of it rising through the cracked window, traffic and voices and somewhere a siren, the particular orchestration of 8 million people moving through their morning with no idea what was converging 12 floors above them. Naomi felt her heart still beating too fast, felt the tremor in her hands that had not fully resolved, felt the rawness in her throat from the sound she'd made when she threw the carafe, that pure animal alarm that had come from somewhere below thought. She felt all of it, and she stayed on the couch, and she breathed. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she had never seen before. Not Vincent's burner, not Marco, not anyone she had given this number to. She stared at the incoming call for 3 rings, and then she answered it because she had been answering unknown numbers for a week, and because something had told her from the first second that this one was different. Not the flat operational voice from the Audi, not Cross, not Webb. A woman's voice. "Mrs. Moretti," the voice said. "My name is Sandra Fitch. Gerald Fitch is my husband." A pause. Not a dramatic one, a tired one. The pause of a woman who has been awake all night, arriving at a decision that she cannot walk back from. I think we need to talk. Sandra Fitch had a voice like someone who had been crying for a long time and had stopped. Not because she felt better, but because she had run out of the particular resource crying required. Naomi held the phone against her ear and looked at the cracked window and the pale morning beyond it and said, "How did you get this number?" "Paula Marin," Sandra said. "She called my personal cell an hour ago. She said you were someone who understood what it meant to find out the truth too late." A pause. "I don't know if that's accurate." "It's partially accurate," Naomi said. "I found documents in our house last night, after Gerald was suspended. I found them in a place. He had a space in the garage behind the insulation panel in the back wall. I didn't know it existed. I don't know how long it's existed." Another pause, and in it Naomi could hear the sound of a woman sitting very still in a very quiet room, holding something she didn't know what to do with. "There are names in these documents, not just your husband's name. Other names. People I know. People I've had dinner with." "What kind of documents?" Naomi said carefully. "Payments, agreements. Some of them they look like transcripts of conversations that were recorded without the other person knowing. A breath that caught slightly on the way in. One of them is dated 4 years ago. It's a recording of a federal judge." Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. "Mrs. Fitch," she said, "I need you to not move those documents. Don't touch them. Don't photograph them. Don't move them from where you found them. Where are you right now?" "At home. Westchester." "Are you alone?" "The kids are at school. I don't know where Gerald is. He left last night after they told him about the suspension, and he hasn't come back." "Okay." Naomi looked at Ellen, who was watching her with complete attention. "I'm going to give you a phone number. You're going to call it immediately after you hang up with me. You're going to tell the man who answers exactly what you told me, and you're going to tell him where the documents are, and you're going to wait in your house until someone comes to you. Can you do that?" A silence. The kind that meant yes, but needed a moment to get there. "Yes," Sandra Fitch said. "His name is Daniel Cross. He's a federal agent, and he is not connected to your husband's cases." Naomi gave the number from memory. "Call him now." "Okay." A breath. "Mrs. Moretti." "Yes." "I'm sorry," Sandra said. I know it doesn't do anything, but I'm sorry." Naomi looked at the cracked window, at the spiderweb fracture spreading from the impact point in delicate branching lines, each one following the path of least resistance through the glass, each one clean and permanent. "Call Cross," she said, and hung up. She called Cross herself 30 seconds later and told him Sandra Fitch was about to call, told him about the garage panel and the documents and the name that Sandra had said, the federal judge, and listened to the quality of Cross's silence, which was the silence of a man watching something he thought he understood reveal additional dimensions he hadn't mapped. "A judge," he said. "That's what she said." "Which judge?" "She didn't say. She said she knows the person. She's had dinner with them." A longer silence, then, "I'll take her call, thank you." He paused. "Naomi, Rusk was picked up 20 minutes ago in Hoboken. He's talking." "About Marco?" "About Marco. About the order. About the building layout that someone provided him." He paused again, and this pause was different. It had a quality of decision in it. The layout came from inside Vincent's organization, not from Marco directly. From someone who had access to the federal building's maintenance records through a city contractor connection. He stopped. "Vincent didn't order the balcony. You were right." She absorbed that. "Where is Marco?" she said. "Newark. We had a team waiting on the Jersey side based on your call. He's in custody." A beat. He had a bag with him. Cash, 2 passports, a phone with 38 contacts stored as numbers. She closed her eyes for a moment. 38 contacts stored as numbers. The system she had identified in Vincent, replicated and expanded in the man who had been studying Vincent's methods for 11 years and had decided at some point in the last 4 days that he was the one who should be running things. "Vincent?" she said. "His attorney brought him in 40 minutes ago. He's in an interview room downstairs. A pause. Naomi. He asked if you were all right. That was the first thing he said when he walked in. She didn't say anything to that. I thought you should know, Cross said, and then he hung up. She sat on the couch for a while after that. Ellen made coffee, real coffee, from the apartment's small kitchen, strong and black, and brought her a cup without being asked, and sat beside her again, and the two of them drank their coffee in the morning light that came through the cracked window, and the city went about its business 12 floors below. What happens now? Ellen said. Now the lawyers take over, Naomi said, and the investigators, and the courts. She looked at her cup. It's going to take a long time. The case, the trial, all of it. A long time. And you? I'm going to be in it for a while, she said. Testimony, cooperation, the agreement with Cross. She paused. And then, eventually, I'm going to be out of it. Ellen was quiet for a moment. And then what? Naomi looked at her sister, at the person who had opened a door on a Friday night to a woman in a stranger's sweatshirt and made soup without asking why, who had sat beside her in the dark and not required her to perform anything. Then I figure out what's next, she said. Like a person. Ellen nodded. She drank her coffee. Okay, she said. I can work with that. The cooperation agreement was signed on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the river. By then, the shape of the case had expanded beyond what anyone, except possibly Cross, had originally anticipated. Gerald Fitch had surrendered himself to federal custody the morning after Sandra's call, with an attorney and a prepared statement, and the look of a man who had decided that cooperation was the only available architecture for whatever remained of his life. The documents in the garage, 42 pages of correspondence, payment records, and the transcripts of 3 separate recorded conversations, one of which did involve a federal judge who was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, were entered into evidence under a chain of custody that Cross had personally ensured was airtight. The judge's name was not released publicly for 11 days. When it was, it produced the kind of silence in the legal community that meant something fundamental had shifted, the way a building sounds different after a load-bearing wall is removed. Marco Tessari was charged with conspiracy, obstruction, witness intimidation, and attempted murder. The last count stemming from Kevin Rusk's statement, which was detailed and corroborated and delivered with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had calculated that the cooperation math favored him. Marco had not spoken a word in his interview beyond his name and a request for counsel. He sat in that room with his hands flat on the table and his face doing nothing, and Naomi thought, when Cross told her this, that it was a perfect image of what 11 years of learning from Vincent had produced. A man who knew how to be silent and had mistaken silence for strategy. Vincent's interview took 7 hours across 2 sessions. His attorney was present for both. Cross told Naomi the broad outlines because she was part of the cooperation framework and had a right to relevant information, and the broad outline was this. Vincent had known about Fitch for 6 years, had cultivated the relationship deliberately and systematically, and had paid amounts that totaled, across the full period, enough to make the arrangement one of the most significant documented corruptions of federal prosecution in the district's recent history. He had not known specifically about the Phoenix witness until after the fact. Cross believed him. Naomi believed Cross. What Vincent had to say about Marco was something Cross described only as comprehensive. He used that word once and did not elaborate, and she did not push. She gave her own testimony across 3 sessions, the first of which lasted 4.5 hours and left her with a headache that lasted 2 days and the particular exhaustion of someone who has been asked to remember things with precision that she has spent years trying to hold at arm's length from full consciousness. Webb was present for all 3. He brought coffee to the second session without being asked, and she thought that this was a quality she had undervalued in people. The ones who noticed what you needed without requiring you to name it. The physical documents she had collected over 36 months were entered into the record in their entirety. The index she had typed at Ellen's kitchen table at 6 in the morning was noted by 2 separate investigators as unusually thorough. One of them, a woman from the financial crimes unit named Reyes, who had no relation to Ellen, asked her, in a moment between formal session and formal session, how she had organized the material without any legal training. Naomi thought about it, I worked backward from consequence, she said. I thought about what would matter if it ever came out, and I documented for that. Reyes looked at her for a moment. You should think about law school, she said. It was said simply, without flattery. Naomi had thought about it, actually. Not law school specifically, but something in that direction. Something that used the particular skill set she had developed in the margins of 14 years. The capacity to observe without being seen observing, to hold information in careful arrangement, to understand systems by watching how they failed. She had not known what to call that skill set before. She was beginning to have ideas. She moved out of the marital home on a Tuesday in February, 6 weeks after the river. It was not a dramatic process. She had a moving company, small, professional, booked through Webb's office assistant, which she suspected was not the first time Webb's office assistant had booked a moving company for a cooperation witness. 2 men with a truck. 4 hours. She took what was hers, not everything she could claim, not the furniture or the art or the accumulated objects of a life built in proximity to a great deal of money, her clothes, her books, the photograph of her parents on their anniversary that had lived on the dresser in the bedroom, a coffee cup she'd had since before Vincent. She stood in the front hall of the house on the last trip out, empty-handed, looking at the space she had occupied for 11 years, the floors she had walked in the dark, the rooms she had moved through in the careful, managed way of a woman who has learned to take up a precise and limited amount of space, the office where she had been when she heard his key in the lock and had straightened the desk and composed her face and gone upstairs. She stood there for 60 seconds, not out of sentiment, or not only, out of something more honest than sentiment, the acknowledgement that this had been her life and that it had mattered and that its ending was real, and that real endings deserved a moment of looking at rather than being walked away from without seeing. Then she walked out. The apartment she moved into was in a neighborhood she'd always liked and never lived in, Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, a street with trees that would have leaves on them in 2 months, a coffee place on the corner that had been there long enough to know its own mind. The apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building with old radiators that clanked and windows that let in good morning light. She set the coffee cup on the kitchen counter. She hung the photograph of her parents in the bedroom. She made the bed with sheets she had bought new, in a color she chose because she liked it and for no other reason. And she stood at the bedroom window for a while looking at the street below and at the trees and at the specific ordinary texture of a neighborhood going about its life. It was enough. Ellen came over the first Saturday and they ordered food and sat on the floor because Naomi didn't have a couch yet, and ate from containers and talked about practical things. What furniture to get, how the light moved through the rooms at different times of day, what Ellen thought about the radiators, which she thought were charming and Naomi thought were loud. They talked about their parents and about a trip they had always said they would take together and never had. They did not talk about the case or Vincent or the river until Ellen, at some point in the middle of the evening with her back against the wall and her food container in her lap, said, "How are you actually doing?" Naomi considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm tired," she said, "all the time. Like, there's a kind of tired that goes down to the cellular level and needs a different kind of sleep to fix." "Will it fix?" "I think so, not fast." Ellen nodded. "What else?" "I feel clear," Naomi said. "That sounds like it should feel better than it does. It's not entirely comfortable being clear. There's nothing to manage anymore. Nothing I'm choosing not to see." She looked at her food container. "I keep noticing things I wasn't noticing before. The way the light is right now, the fact that the radiator is loud but warm, that kind of thing." "That sounds like a person coming back," Ellen said. Naomi looked at her. "Yeah," she said, "I think that's what it is." She saw Vincent once more. It was in April in a courthouse corridor during a recess in one of the preliminary hearings, and it happened without arrangement. She was coming out of a side room with Webb, and he was being moved down the corridor with his attorney and the federal officer assigned to him, and their paths converged at a corner in the way that courthouse geometry sometimes made inevitable, regardless of everyone's best efforts. He looked different. Not diminished, exactly. He had aged in a particular way that she recognized as what happened when the particular energy required to maintain control was no longer available. Something had released in his face, some long-held tension, and underneath it he looked more like the man she had first met than the man he had spent the subsequent years becoming. Older than that man, more tired, but more like himself. He saw her. He stopped. His attorney's hand went to his arm briefly and then withdrew. They looked at each other in a courthouse corridor with 4 other people present and the fluorescent light doing what fluorescent light does. And she thought about the river, and about the front hall of their house, and about a phone call at 6 in the morning with his voice sounding like something at the end of its supply. She thought about 14 years. She thought about what 14 years was, what a substantial portion of an adult life looked like when you held it up to the light and examined what it had been made of. He said her name. Just her name. Just that. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "Take care of yourself, Vincent." He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved in his face that she did not try to read. Then he nodded. A small, genuine nod, without calculation, without performance. And he walked on down the corridor. She turned and walked the other way. Webb fell into step beside her. He said nothing. She appreciated that more than she could have said. The sentencing, when it came, was on a Friday morning in October. She did not attend. She had been advised she could, had been told her presence was not required, had made her decision without much deliberation and without regret. She had said what she needed to say in the testimony sessions, had put her name on the documents and had them entered into the record, and had answered every question put to her by every attorney in every room she had been put in, and that was the work she had agreed to do, and she had done it. She learned the outcome from Webb, who called it 1140. 22 years, he said. Federal, no parole eligibility for 16. She was sitting in the coffee place on her corner. She had a cup of coffee and a book she was 3/4 through, and a window with a view of the street where the October trees were red and gold and doing something extraordinary with the morning light. She looked out the window when Webb told her. "And Marco," she said, 18 years. His cooperation was more limited, and the attempted murder charge held up." He paused. "Fitch got 12, which I think is light, but that's the federal prosecutor's calculation, not mine." "The judge?" "Still proceeding. That one will take longer." Another pause. "Naomi, are you all right?" She looked at the trees. She looked at the people on the sidewalk. A man walking a dog that was interested in everything. A woman pushing a stroller one-handed while looking at her phone. 2 kids in school uniforms walking faster than they looked like they were walking. The particular urgency of people who are late and haven't fully admitted it to themselves yet. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." After she hung up, she sat for a while and finished her coffee, and then she ordered another one and finished that too. And she read 30 more pages of her book, and when she got to the end of a chapter, she set it down and looked out the window and let herself feel what was there to feel, which was complicated and not entirely resolved and was going to take more time than she had yet given it. She knew that. She was prepared to give it the time. Ray Decker called in November. She had tracked him down in August. Not through any complicated means, just a phone book search for R. Decker in Kellerton, of which there was only one, and had written him a letter because some things deserved to be letters rather than calls or texts. And she had thanked him in the letter as specifically as she could, not just for pulling her out, but for the way he had done it, for the fact that he had gotten on his stomach on cracking ice with his wife's coffee in a thermos and his hand extended, for the fact that he had driven her to Orfield without asking the wrong questions, for the fact that he had not required her to perform gratitude in real time when she didn't have the capacity for it. He called because he was not a letter writer, he said. He hoped that was all right. "It's all right," she said. "Carol wanted me to ask if you'd found a good place to land," he said. "She worries about people after they leave the diner." Naomi smiled. It was a real one. "Tell Carol I found a good place," she said. "She'll be glad to hear that." A pause, and in it she could hear what she remembered of him. The even, uncomplicated decency of a man who had looked at a stranger on cracking ice and made a decision without calculating what it would cost him. "You doing okay? For real?" "For real," she said. "Yes." "Good," he said, simply, the way he said most things, without decoration. "That's all we were wondering." They talked for 12 minutes. He told her Carol was thinking about expanding the diner, adding a back room for private events. She told him she had started taking classes. Not law school, not yet, but a paralegal certification program that met 3 evenings a week and was harder than she'd expected and more interesting. He told her winter had come early to Kellerton and the Callahan River had frozen again. Same spot, she said. Little further downstream this year. They put up signs. Good, she said. She thought about the river all that day, on and off, the way she had been thinking about it since January, not with the acute specific quality of trauma, but with something more like the attention you gave to something that had changed you in a way that was still clarifying. What it had taken from her was real. What it had made possible was also real. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and she had stopped trying to weigh them against each other and had instead let them sit side by side in the way that difficult truths sometimes had to sit. She had gone into that river someone's wife, someone's object of management and surveillance and conditional loyalty, someone who had learned to be small in a large house. She had come out of it herself. That was not a clean narrative. It was not a triumph, because real things weren't triumphs. They were just what happened and what you did with it. But it was true, and she had found that truth was what she could live in now, even the uncomfortable kind, even the kind that had no easy resolution, even the kind that sat heavy at the bottom of the chest on certain mornings. She could live in it. She was living in it. In December, she bought a couch. It sounds like a small thing and was not a small thing. She had been living with a floor and a chair and the things she had brought from the life before, and she had been fine. And then one Saturday she went to a furniture store in Red Hook and stood in front of a couch that was a deep gray-green color, the color of a river in summer, and she put her hand on the cushion and stood there for a moment, and then she bought it. They delivered it on a Wednesday, and she and the 2 delivery men maneuvered it up the narrow stairwell with more coordination than conversation. And when they left, she sat on it in her living room and looked at the light coming through the window and the photograph of her parents visible through the bedroom doorway and the coffee cup on the kitchen counter. She thought, this is mine. Not as a declaration, not as a claim against anything or anyone, just as a fact about the space she was in and the life it belonged to. This apartment, this couch, this morning with its particular light, hers. She sat there for a while, doing nothing in particular, and the radiator clanked, and outside on the street someone was laughing at something, and the trees on the block had gone bare for winter, but you could see the shape of them, the real architecture of branch and trunk that leaves concealed. And she thought that there was something to that, something worth noting, that what you see when everything is stripped back is the actual structure. She was looking at her actual structure. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, after everything, the thing she had gone into that frozen water to find, though she hadn't known she was looking for it. Not the evidence, not the case, not the cooperation agreement, or the testimony, or the sentencing. This, a room, a couch, a window with light in it. The simple, durable, indestructible fact of a life that belonged entirely to the person living it. She reached for her book. She read until the light changed.